Alright. 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Time to revive this thing. Let's do it. I appreciate all you guys who showed up early. I say we get right into it. So, welcome everybody. This is CtB Bootshine. This is my bi-weekly podcast that I started a couple months ago at this point, or the earlier part of this year. This is my sometimes solo podcast, most of the time solo podcast that I do that tries to give a microphone to all issues and discussions regarding Final Fantasy XIV's endgame. And I think there's going to be a lot of that today, specifically because you can't talk about endgames without referencing new expansions. And just this past couple weeks ago, we had the North American Fanfest of 2018. And in that Fanfest weekend, we had a reveal of the next expansion for Final Fantasy XIV. We had the reveal of Shadowbringers. And there's going to be a lot to talk about with that today, as well as going over the Fanfest event itself. I definitely think there's some fun things to highlight with that. We had some cool announcements. We had some controversial announcements over the weekend. All that we're gonna try to run down the big ones tonight. But I appreciate you guys showing up. This is gonna be broadcast live on Twitch tonight and later put on YouTube for anyone who's not here, who's listening after the fact. Hello from the past. There will also be audio versions made available at a later date. More information on that probably in a week or so. But everyone, welcome. I haven't done one of these in a long time. Let's sort of talk about that. I took a long hiatus from doing this show, sort of after the Ultimate Weapon encounter was released, because I had actually taken a break from the game. I've, through either the 5.0 excitement or just my desire to get back into the game and the game's community, now with my interest rekindled, I definitely want to get back into doing this show. I didn't feel that it was right for me to be doing this show when I didn't have a large investment in the game, because I couldn't really talk about some of the things that I'd want to be talking about with the necessary passion required behind them. So, with the fire rekindled, I definitely am looking forward to rebooting this off. And I know that for this, we'll call it a quote-unquote Season 2 of CtB Bootshine. I've got 5 episodes planned. This will be the first of the 5. The easy one, probably the easiest of the 5, I would say, because we have the obvious excitement over Fanfest, the NA Fanfest at least. I've done a little bit of discussion about the Fanfest and some of the announcements already, but nothing with the sort of microphone that something like my podcast can offer. So I definitely want to do a bit of a deeper dive tonight into some of my opinions and some of your guys' opinions on what we heard and what we saw. So, I think without further ado, let's just get right into the topics. I do want to spend the majority of the show tonight discussing the actual announcements. However, I would also like to spend a bit of time highlighting the weekend itself and the actual event and some of the events surrounding Fanfest. The NA Fanfest again took place in Vegas, just like it did in 2016 and 2014. I was lucky enough to attend both 2016 and 2018, and I thought that they were both very enjoyable for their own unique reasons. You have the 2016 Fanfest being located right off of the Vegas Strip, which gave a lot of entertainment throughout the weekend. We have some pictures here of some of the, I guess, highlights of the weekend. If you've never been to a Final Fantasy Fanfest, things you can expect are a lot of bright lights, a lot of nerds, and a lot of memes. IRL. IRL memes are a big focal point of Final Fantasy Fanfests. That can't be understated. So if you're into that, it's always a great time. I think that this most recent one, even more so than the previous ones, I think was very communal, and a lot of people had a lot of fun and got together and did all sorts of unique outings and stuff. So it was just a great time. Highly recommend anyone trying to get out there for future Fanfests, be it even the ones in Paris and Tokyo coming up, but specifically next time coming up in 2020, when I'm assuming we'll have it back in Vegas again. But I think that the overall weekend was a great time for even the people who didn't attend to the actual convention hall itself. There was, it's always fun to meet up with your, be it your static mates or, people who don't necessarily play Final Fantasy, but maybe they play other games with you. It's just a great social experience. I know that speaking for my free company specifically, Elysium had a great turnout this year. We had a great turnout in 2016, but I think we even exceeded that in 2018. It was a lot of fun to hang out with all of them. Obviously you can see we're out there in full force with our flag. It drew a lot of attention, some of it more hilarious than others. And I tried to get a lot of pictures of the Vegas lights and the Strip and some of the events that took place over the weekend. A lot of dinner outings and just a lot of tomfoolery. But it was overall a really great time. And I was really happy that we could spend as much time meeting people as we could. Because that's definitely one of the more, I think, fun and engaging aspects of being there, is meeting the people who you didn't necessarily even expect to meet. I had a great time, and I assume everyone I've talked to that attended had a great time as well. So, yeah, I think that some of the probably bigger announcements were somewhat expected. I think everyone went into the event sort of expecting, based off of how 2014 and 2016 went, that we were probably going to be hearing about 5.0 and the new expansion coming up. It's typically the timeline in which they release this kind of stuff. I felt it would be a great use of our time to, if you've been living under a rock, you haven't seen it, but just to sort of set the stage and set the tone for the stuff we're going to be talking about, I thought it'd be a great use of our time to sort of open up here by actually watching the trailer that they released at the very beginning of the keynote of Fanfest. So I'm going to air that in about a second here, and we'll watch through the trailer for the 5.0 expansion, Shadowbringers, and kick back and enjoy the show.
Have come and gone since that day. How many years have I waited for this moment? For the one that stood alone against the storm. For the one they called the warrior of light.
This town certainly has changed, and not at all for the better.
This tragedy, greater even than the seventh umbral calamity, must be undone. If history must be unwritten, Let it be unwritten. Become what you must. Become the warrior of darkness.
So that trailer was a lot of fun. I think that what was most interesting about that trailer, obviously, was the soundtrack to the trailer right out of the gate. I know that Nobuo Uematsu has been ill recently, so he sort of stepped down from a lot of his projects he's working on, and I would imagine that's why they probably went in the direction that they did for the new style of main theme for the expansion. But I thought it was a hit. I know that they were concerned about it a bit, but I thought it fits the edgy theme feel. Yeah, there are a couple cool things in that trailer that I think are worth highlighting. Definitely one of the reasons I wanted to show it off to start the show today. I thought it was a very nice touch for them to sort of go through all the iterations of our boy Derplander. You even had the 1.0 homage to Bard there, or I guess Archer back then, when the game first released back in 1.0. I thought that was a very nice touch and a nice homage. We had the obvious big hype from the crowd. Just in case it didn't transmit through the stream audio, there was a lot of hype from the crowd when what I assume to be Thancred is running up the stairs of Amdapor, and everyone sees the Gunblade on his back. There's been a lot of rumor of a Gunblade-related job being released in 5.0, so all that does is just pour more gasoline on that already very well lit fire. So that's definitely something that everybody is really looking forward to, is the new jobs that are coming out in 5.0. And we didn't get a ton of information on the all three of them. We did get a lot of information on at least one of them. But I just thoroughly enjoyed the trailer. I thought the reception for their trailer was better than even their Stormblood trailer, and it rivaled the Heavensward trailer release. So big props, I think, to the department behind that trailer. After the trailer was released in the keynote, we transitioned into some of the more specific details of what Shadowbringers is actually going to be. Some of those things we'll talk about today, and some of those things we won't talk about, just because I want to highlight the ones that I think are going to probably affect endgame the most, because that's typically what we talk about here. So I think probably the biggest of the keynote, well, I wouldn't say biggest, but one of the big highlights from the keynote is the somewhat, I guess, understanding or realization of what 5.0 is going to be is probably going to be the same formula that we've gotten for the last couple expansions. I know that people were really looking forward to them trying to break the mold with their content formula and their content release formula. Based on what we saw from the keynote, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. We're probably going to be seeing the same content formula going forward. I want to say that my reaction to this is I'm not too surprised that 5.0 is being advertised as is. I'm going to withhold my judgment on that, and I would probably recommend that other people do so as well until we get a bit more info about 5.1 and beyond. Because if you look back at some of the older expansions, well, I shouldn't say older expansions, but if you look back at previous expansions, we don't really see them sort of experimenting with new gameplay aspects or just new modes of content in the initial expansion launches. There's so much content they pack into those launches, be it from MSQ and early launch primals and the new raid, and just the fact that you have 10 new levels on all your jobs and crafters. I don't think we'll be seeing much deviation from anything until 5.1 plus. So I'm probably going to be holding out my judgment on their content formula until 5.1 and beyond, and I'm going to wait till we're probably not going to hear much about that until very, very, very close to the expansion, if even then. I wouldn't expect to even hear anything about 5.1 or later content until the third FanFest in Tokyo, to be honest. Even if that, it might not even be that. It might be a letter from the producer live afterwards. But I got my sights set on 5.1 and beyond for them to sort of break the mold and experiment with things. That's typically what they like to do. It's those later patches in the expansion cycles where they start to deviate a bit and try new things here and there. You know, we saw it with Stormblood. We saw them do a lot of experimentation with Eureka, which we this weekend later learned that this kind of actually set the stage for some cross-world stuff that they're going to be implementing in Shadowbringers. We can talk about that in a minute. But yeah, we're probably going to be coming out of the gate with the same formula we're used to, which is, you know, we have the Beastmen tribes. Those guys have primals that they worship. We get a couple primal battles out of it. We have an 8-man raid, and we have a 24-man quote-unquote filler raid. And then we have a bunch of dungeons and MSQ, and new jobs and new job abilities, and that's what we have to look forward to. Beyond that, we got some confirmation about what they're going to do with some of the existing abilities in 5.0. We know that we're going to be looking at probably another ability pruning. I think that that's not too surprising. It's probably to be expected. However, it gives me a bit of worry for people's leveling experience once again. I mean, if you look at what the last set of pruning did to the leveling experience currently in the game, it's very bad for some jobs. I'm going to be honest. The leveling experience for certain jobs was absolutely gutted by the ability pruning from Stormblood. So if we're going to be seeing more of that in Shadowbringers, I'm very concerned for the leveling experience of this game. You know, that doesn't really affect all the people who have all their stuff already leveled, but they've gone on record multiple times saying that one of their biggest subscriber counts to this game is new players. And if they're bringing in new players with every expansion, they've got to bring them into a game that is enjoyable to level in. So they're gonna have to work on that, I think, a bit, and make sure they don't damage it too much with more pruning. It would be nice if, I agree with what's being said in chat right now. It would be nice if they just prune some of the later abilities and leave the already neutered early game abilities alone, or even, please, for the love of God, add some things to the early game. So we'll see how that goes. I'll be interested to see what they do with the job gauges specifically. Are they going to expand on these? Are we going to get updates to our job gauges? Are we going to get additional resources added? What's going to happen there? Only time will tell, really. Like, it just depends on what they want to do. If they want to just update the class kits, or if they want to just add new abilities. This is a great segue into another change that was announced in the keynote. I believe it was the keynote. I'm actually not 100%. I think I'm about 90%. We have the formal announcement that TP's days are long numbered. Maybe not long numbered. Maybe they're actually pretty short numbered if you think about it. TP's got a couple months left in its lifespan. They have confirmed that we're going to be combining TP and MP into one resource going forward. And that's obviously going to be changing the ability kit for certain jobs. For those jobs that are losing a resource, those dual resource jobs, are we going to see a new resource implementation into their job gauge? Are we going to see changes to their abilities in the forms of maybe things that cost TP or MP right now? Maybe they just go to a charge system, similar to how other MMOs do it. Specific references to bards, dark knights, paladins. What are we going to see there? Those dual resource jobs. Only time will tell. Again, we're going to require more information, I think, from future live letters and future FanFests on that one. I'm expecting that some of the finer details of the job-specific tunings and changes to come about in later live letters, more specifically than anything. Just based off of past experience with their live letters with expansion releases. So that's definitely something to look out for. What else happened in the keynote? We obviously had the announcement that there will be new jobs in 5.0. We've already talked about that a little bit. We know that there's going to be multiple new jobs, and it has been long theorized that there will be 3 new jobs being added to 5.0. What was specifically of interest is they did come out and actually announce what one of those new jobs would be. That was the Blue Mage. Blue Mage is something we're going to spend. It's going to have its own section of today's show, so we won't go too into that right now. But the unique thing about Blue Mage is that it's going to be added in 4.5 instead of 5.0, and that was a bit of a shock, I think, to a lot of people because I do know that they specifically stated a while back that after the release of Ninja in 2.4, they didn't feel that it was a very good idea for their resource allocation to be adding those new jobs in patches before expansions. So it was very surprising to see them take that approach again. Obviously, it met a very large, warm reception from the crowd. People get their content earlier. Who's not going to be excited about that? We did get a confirmation about a new race being added in 5.0. Yoshida, in his typical FanFest fashion, teased it all throughout the keynote with his bunny rabbit shirt. So, all signs lead to Vieira. Ivlis theme in 4.5. That's going to segue right into the 5.0 new race. I don't think anyone's really surprised by the inclusion of Vieira. So, I liked Vieira's in Final Fantasy 12 and some of the Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced games. I think that they'll be a welcome addition to the weeb city that is Final Fantasy 14. Everyone's going to want to be a bunny girl for a while. Other than the keynote, there were a lot of panels throughout the day, throughout the weekend. One of the more interesting panels that I want to talk about today, and we'll segue into this shortly. There was a developer panel that spent a large portion of its time going over one of the key developers for the Ultimate series. People are calling it the Ultimate panel. It really was. It kind of dominated the panel. And that's definitely, there was a lot of great information there and a lot of really cool things that we kind of knew already, but it was really cool to actually hear them come out and say it. So I think we'll start to move away from the keynote. We hit probably the biggest announcements from it. We knew that there's going to be, we did learn from the keynote that there's going to be some data center shuffling, and I completely plan to talk about that towards the later half of the show. Again, just like Blue Mage, it has its own section in the show, so don't think I'm going to gloss over that, just saving it for a later topic. We highlighted that there's going to be some cross-world stuff, and again, we'll talk about that more later. I want to cover one of the more interesting panels, and that's the Ultimate panel. This was really cool to me because Yoshida's gotten a lot of feedback about this in the past, where players would love to see the developers of their favorite fights more highlighted. I know that was some feedback I gave them last FanFest, and also specifically after Ultimate Weapon was released, that we really want to meet these developers behind these crazy fights that we all love progging. And I think Yoshida and the FanFest team definitely heard that, and as a result, we got an hour-and-a-half long panel with one of the biggest developers the game's had. So that was really cool and a lot of fun to watch. And for anybody who kind of shut the stream off after the keynote, this part is definitely for you, because there was a lot of really cool things in that panel that I think definitely the large player base should take note of and look at. So the panel mostly featured it was Yoshida, Koji, translator woman whose name escapes me right now, and Yokozawa, who I guess is more commonly referred to as Mr. Atma. He's one of the biggest developers for a lot of our favorite fights in Final Fantasy XIV. And I've got a lot of his work up here on the screen right now for everyone watching live. There's a lot of really great encounters from this guy. He's a lot more than just a battle designer. He's worked on a lot of the game's programming and some of the early issues with latency and stuff. But this guy had a lot of really cool things to say that really resonated, I think, with the rating audience of the game. And I want to highlight some of the more interesting things that came out of this panel. What we kind of knew about the Ultimate Series was the Ultimate Series is designed with the hardcore audience in mind, but it has never been resource efficient for them to design Ultimate content for such a small demographic of their game. The Ultimate Series has been their response to that, and what it is it specifically uses pre-existing resources in the game without much alteration, takes those resources and puts them into a fight, tunes them in a way, and makes them interact makes mechanics interact with other mechanics to make a super difficult fight. And Yokozawa went to talk about how you take pre-existing resources and use them to make a fight that is truly difficult. And I think Ultimate Weapon is a great example of that. We did a Crit the Bootshine episode actually on the entirety of Ultimate Weapon itself, so we won't spend time going over the specifics of it, but I thought it was very cool to hear him talk about how he wanted to design the fight so that it was very spectator friendly specifically. He understands that not everybody is going to have the time of schedule to be able to attempt these ultimate fights, so he wants to create an environment that is enjoyable for not only the people progressing these fights, but also for the people who are just watching on live streams on Twitch. And he specifically highlighted that he wants to make fights that are enjoyable to watch during progression, because when you're watching a clear video on a VOD or YouTube, a lot of the joys and highlights of progression go unseen. And that really resonated with me because, hey, that's literally why I do those encounter shows that I do, those encounter reviews. It's because when people are just watching a clear video, they're missing out on all the fun of progression. And that really resonated with me, and I think was just kind of like a breath of fresh air to actually hear from a developer. He's completely in tune with what makes a fight enjoyable to not only prog but also to watch. So honestly speaking, they're very lucky to have him on the development team. I thought it was interesting in this panel that Yoshida noted that there's really only 3 developers that he trusts to tackle these the Ultimate Series. Yokozawa specifically highlighted that the limitations that he works under of not being able to create new resources or new elements, having to use the pre-existing ones in the game, those sort of boundaries and limitations, they're what give birth to a creativity such as his, because you have to really think out of the box. When you take something that already exists in the game, you have to really think out of the box for a new way to utilize those mechanics and those resources. And that's how you get really interesting mechanics like the woke mechanic and the awakening mechanic that you find in Ultimate Weapon. It was just a great panel for the developers to highlight him with. I think that it was maybe a bit of a surprise to some that they specifically went in this panel to highlight that they love watching the progression race for these ultimate encounters. I think that based on feedback towards Ultimate from UCOB, had a bit of a negative reaction from, I would say, the larger player base. I would say the more hardcore side of the rating audience really enjoyed it, but the larger player base gave it sort of mixed reviews and negative reactions. So for them to still comment that the progression races were of interest to them was also nice to hear, just being that myself and a lot of people probably watching this show are progression raters, and we take a lot of interest in that. It was a really enjoyable panel. Definitely, if you can catch the bot of it somehow, I highly recommend it. A lot of fun information there. This guy's a real deviant. He's a bamboozler. The other panels throughout the day, we had the cosplay. We had the cosplay event. We had the PvP event. We had some more developer-related stuff. I think what everyone was looking forward to after the concerts and the ultimate panel and whatnot was we were all anxious to hear the live letter that was scheduled for day 2. Because the live letter is where a lot of the juice was. The juice about the new job Blue Mage. The juice about the data centers and the data center migration that was hinted at the day before. What I wanted to highlight with the live letter specifically was the sort of the specifics and details of what they were releasing about Blue Mage. This was actually aired at the end of the keynote, but I saved it for this part of the show. I'm going to air their Blue Mage teaser trailer that they released towards the end of the keynote, and it'll set us up nicely for discussing all of their live letter announcements about Blue Mage. So please enjoy again. So that was the teaser trailer that they released at the end of the keynote regarding Blue Mage. I think that at that point in time, the crowd was at its all-time hypest. I know myself specifically, I was going nuts in the crowd. I'm pretty sure I almost knocked Fold out of his chair, who was sitting next to me. And then we got more details about what Blue Mage actually is in the following day at the live letter. I know that it's been beaten to death that the announcement of Blue Mage and some of the details behind it had less than a warm reception, I want to say. I was watching it back. I thought this was interesting. I was watching it back on the live stream once I got home from FanFest because I wanted to see how the stream experience varied versus the actual in-person experience. And while I will say that, it was true that reception was probably not as warm as it might have been had the job been announced as an actually fully released job. However, one thing that I think the people at home missed out on is the crowd mics for the event were actually very poor. I don't know if it was the number of them or the placements of them or just their ability to pick up the audio. But the actual venue itself was much louder than came through on the stream. So it's not necessarily. A lot of people were highlighting on Reddit that you could hear a pin drop when they were talking about Blue Mage, and that really wasn't the case at all. People were still showing their support. There were still claps. I don't think people were beside themselves excited. But yeah, definitely wanted to at least mention that. So what is actually going on in Blue Mage? So Blue Mage is being announced as Final Fantasy XIV's first limited job. And when they first said the word limited, I didn't know what this meant. I will give you... So let's go through what it is, and then I'll talk about what I was expecting it to be. Blue Mage's limited job basically means that it's limited in a number of ways. Firstly, it's limited in its level cap. At release in 4.5, its maximum level is going to be level 50, and obviously the rest of the game's jobs have a level cap of level 70. And when Shadowbringers launches, that level cap for those other jobs is going to be raised to 80, and it's a bit unclear, but I think expected that Blue Mage will probably remain with a level 50 cap even at that point. But we'll need a bit more specifics on that if they're going to raise it up to 55 or 60 or something with Shadowbringers 5.0 launch. But we are going to get Blue Mage in 4.5, and its level cap is going to be 50. Now this obviously confused people right away when they first read it, because okay, does that mean it's just going to be level 50 for now, and they're going to raise it up to 70 or 80 when Shadowbringers actually releases? Is this them giving like an early access to Blue Mage? You can try it and mess around with it, but you won't be able to play the full product until Shadowbringers releases. I think that was kind of like what us and our row were expecting when they announced it. But what it actually is something entirely different. It's limited not only in its level cap, but it's also limited in its ability to do content. Because of its level cap, it's going to be restricted to low-level content that is never going to be really part of the end game, or at least relevant end game, concurrent with new patches, unless they release difficult Blue Mage specific content at a later date. Right now what they're doing is they're releasing a solo instance called the I believe it's a solo instance. You might be able to party up with other Blue Mages to do it, but it's at least a Blue Mage only instance called the Mass Carnival, where from what it sounds like, it's just a Blue Mage challenge that you equip or set abilities that you've learned and go and try to tackle quote unquote difficult solo encounters. So we don't have a ton of information about what the Mass Carnival is actually going to be in terms of difficulty or rewards or just incentive in general. But we know that it's a Blue Mage specific duty that you can expect to have future updates in future patches, and they're gonna keep that thing going. I think at this point everyone kind of understood what was going on. We're not getting a real job. This is not a job that you're going to be able to rate on in relevant content. This is a job that is sort of it's like a mini game within Final Fantasy XIV. It truly is a new style of job. It's a new style of gameplay, and I think it took people a couple hours to kind of let that sink in. That I think the expectations were so high for new jobs that when they heard that they weren't getting what they wanted, the initial reaction was negative. I think now once the dust has settled, people are a bit more understanding, albeit maybe still disappointed, but at least more understanding of what we're getting. And what that is they're giving a player base that has largely been neglected since, honestly, the inception of 1.0. They're giving a specific player base an avenue to enjoy the game, and this is a player base demographic that has gone largely ignored for all of Final Fantasy XIV, and that is the solo player. And this is a controversial topic, I think, and it's a great topic for today's show. People are less than welcoming to the idea that solo play has a place in an MMO. And I understand why they feel that way. However, I'm going to be blunt and honest that I feel that that's a very ignorant stance to take. People highlight that this is a massively multiplayer online RPG. It has no room for solo play. But what they don't understand is that there are people out there who enjoy playing in an everlasting, persisting world, but not with other players. They enjoy playing alongside a world full of players, but just necessarily not with them. And you're only going to get that by playing solo in an MMO. And it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's honestly a very small portion of players' cup of tea, but it is a cup of tea that exists. And there are people out there that do enjoy it. And that is overwhelmingly evident by their previous MMO, Final Fantasy XI. I've spent, I would say, maybe a year of my life playing Final Fantasy XI, and I know that there is a large demographic of player in that game that enjoys playing solo, and there is an avenue in Final Fantasy XI that allows them to do so. There hasn't been that in Final Fantasy XIV, and those players have largely been neglected since the beginning of the game. Even in 1.0, there hasn't been good solo content for a player like that. And Etsy has realized this, but they haven't had a way, they haven't had a response for that. They haven't had a way to implement something that is going to exist in 14 that also meets the demands of somebody like that. And what they have done with the limited job system is given a player like that an avenue to enjoy and exist in the 14 ecosystem. And that's what Blue Mage is. If you think about it at its core, and you take away the hype of the announcement or the lack thereof, and your expectations for the announcement, Blue Mage is a response to the solo player that has largely gone ignored in 14. And what Blue Mage is going to do is Blue Mage is going to give a pathway for them to continue to add content for this player-based demographic. I think I specifically heard them mention over the weekend mention of jobs like Beastmaster from Final Fantasy XI. This is another job that's primarily played solo, and one that would be, I would say, require more work to implement into a party-based system, but not impossible. But if they were to make it a limited job and make it a solo experience, it sort of writes itself. And I don't think that Blue Mage is the first or last. Well, I think it's the first, obviously, but I don't think it's the last limited job that we're going to see. Time will tell. This thing could crash and burn. Everything I've said could completely collapse on itself, and the solo demographic could have been killed off so long ago by 14 that it has no chance of returning. I know that it wanted a place in existence back in the game's initial inception, but maybe the damage has been done for so long that player is long gone and they're not coming back. And that could very well happen. We'll have to see what happens with Blue Mage. All of this said, I would have preferred being able to raid on this thing in relevant content. Blue Mage was my favorite job in the Final Fantasy franchise. It still is, and I wanted nothing more than to be able to play it in a raid setting with my friends, in an environment where it's coexisting with other jobs. And it doesn't seem like I'm going to get that until I don't know when. It honestly doesn't seem like we'll get that at all ever in Shadowbringers, and maybe they'd have to change the philosophy towards the job in 6.0 or something. I think that yeah, when you look at it through the lens of the solo player, you can understand why. You can maybe understand why they're doing what they're doing. But that being said, I'm now going to play devil's advocate regarding this, because the most popular argument that I've seen on Reddit or on Twitter is that, oh, this was the only way they could implement Blue Mage into 14. You guys are crazy if you think otherwise. And I just could not agree more, I could not disagree more with that take. I think there were plenty of pathways for them to take a job like Blue Mage, and Blue Mage is extremely unique compared to other jobs. If you're unfamiliar with what a Blue Mage does, it's been transitioning through slides on the screen, but if you're unfamiliar with what a Blue Mage does, is you learn monster skills by actually fighting monsters, and there is a large spellbook of these skills that you can learn. The Final Fantasy XI variant of Blue Mage allowed you to learn hundreds of skills, and then you would be limited by your number of AP available in how many of those skills you could equip and take into a fight. And you would sort of have these pseudo ability loadouts, and that was like a really cool thing, because not only do you have this dynamic where you're catering your party composition to an encounter or to a mob type, now you're catering your ability loadout to an encounter or a mob type. So it's this like entirely new metagame within the job itself. in terms of unique dynamics. And I was really looking forward to something like that. And I was very confident that it could exist in 14. And I'd like to present my counter argument to this opinion that it just could not exist in 14 with the way that Blue Mage is designed in other Final Fantasies. And what I was hoping for, and this is where my mind wandered when they first said limited job. My mind wandered to this because this is what I wanted them to say. I don't think it's necessarily the logical jump or logical conclusion, but my mind immediately went here because this is what I was hoping they were going to say. I was hoping that Blue Mage was going to be 14's first sort of role agnostic or role fluid, role universal job, where you can either set abilities that determine the job's role, or you can pick a role ahead of time, and that sort of limits it limits the number of abilities that you can select for that role. So that's what I was really, really hoping that they were going to do with Blue Mage, and it was going to be the first time they've done that with a job. So, for example, they specifically highlighted at FanFest that Blue Mage has, I think, 49 or more unique monster abilities, and that's a lot of skills. That's more skills than jobs have, and that's just the monster skills alone. You can have Blue Mage, you can have abilities for the Blue Mage specific to their kit that aren't monster related at all. Be they like melee combos or just a universal damaging ability, or party buffs, or MP management. Just the basics that you would expect from like a caster variant, and combine that basic toolkit you have with the 49 or more available monster skills. That is easily enough material and content and ability bloat to separate that job into 3 different roles: tank, DPS, or healer. And that's what I was hoping that we were going to see. I was hoping they might have expanded on this and gone with like, we were finally going to get the introduction of the support role. So maybe Blue Mage could be a DPS, a support, or a tank, something like that, or a DPS or a support or a healer. And your ability loadout, the abilities that you select and the abilities that you learn, maybe determine which role you slot into. Maybe a tank can equip a certain skill that the healer variant of Blue couldn't equip. And I thought it was a totally fine way to balance the job and implement the job into the 14 party-based ecosystem. So I don't buy the argument that it was impossible to implement. People like to cite that, there's just going to be some abilities that are more powerful than others. And of course that's true, but that doesn't mean that those are impossible to tune. Any ability that's more powerful than others, you can just change the cooldown of it, tack a longer cooldown on it. Make it specific to the DPS role. Give an equally powerful ability to the healer role. Give an equally potent and powerful ability to the tank role. There was just so many ways they could have taken it. And I'm not saying this with much of a negative reaction to the direction that they took it. I am only refuting the argument that the direction they took it in, being a solo job, is in a response to it being impossible to implement into the party-based ecosystem, because I do not buy that at all. There were tons of ways they could have done it, and they chose the way they did, and that is there's nothing we can do about it. We hope that it's good. That's all we can say at this point. We hope that it's fun enough to be engaging and long-lasting. Unfortunately, I think some of their more unique ideas, with the exception of maybe Eureka Pyros, have a very short lifespan. And I'm really hoping that this isn't going to be one of them, because, again, it's my favorite job from the Final Fantasy franchise, and I want to see it be an enjoyable experience. I want the Mass Carnival to actually be like fun and challenging, but time will literally tell. We have no idea if any of that's going to be the case. I do think that what I will say is there is a pathway for them to make this, to still make this interesting. There is nothing stopping them from actually creating difficult solo content for Blue Mage that requires very specific ability loadouts, or very specific timing of abilities. There's nothing stopping that from existing. We've already seen albeit it has a lot of RNG involved, but a solo Heaven on High's solo Palace of the Dead runs. You can take that dynamic right there. Put a blue mage in those shoes. Involve the ability to equip different loadouts of abilities, and take that blue mage and put it in an environment where it's an endless climb of see how far you can go with your abilities. And that to me actually would sound like it'd be pretty fun. Personally speaking, I would probably enjoy that. If it's challenging, if it has like an endless ceiling, I think that could be something that they could do to make this job very engaging and also give it a long lifespan. Because that is the big fear for this job, right? We're gonna level it, we're gonna get all the skills, we're gonna clear whatever they offer us in the Masked Carnival, and the job's gonna get sidelined because it's level 50. What are you gonna do with it? You can run Second Cool Savage. Great. Get the glamour. Time will tell, like we've said. 4-5 is actually not that far away. I think we're gonna know pretty soon. Maybe even soon enough to do another Crit the Bootshine on the job itself at a later date. But I thought that aesthetically, the job looks pretty cool. I thought it was cool that they, you can even learn like primal ability from Shiva. They had the bow and arrow ability from Shiva. I can't remember the specific name of the ability, but I don't expect us to be able to learn like every cool ability out there. There's very obviously a clear list of abilities that we're allowed to select from. Maybe like I said, they highlighted there's I think 49 of them or more. That they'll obviously add more abilities as patches go on. I'm just crossing my fingers. I know everybody's crossing their fingers, hoping that it's fun, and I'm right there with you guys. So the other stuff that they talked about in this live letter, moving a bit away from Blue Mage, is we had a bit of information about the specifics of like the cross world. What do you call it? Cross world existence. You can travel from server to server, and exist there, I guess, temporarily. You can play in that server's world. I'm like really struggling to explain this. I don't know why. But you can play cross world now, which is something you couldn't do. This opens up the ability to do maps with people. This world visit. Thank you very much. Yeah, you can visit other worlds. That's the perfect description for it. And this has been something that's been requested for so long, but obviously the infrastructure was never there for it. So I think this is a great implementation. I was very, very concerned about the specifics of it, specifically things that are going to relate to the economy. But things that this does is like you guys are talking about in chat, this opens up cross-world hunts, this opens up cross-world maps, this opens up cross-world RP, this opens up just a lot of things. I think that this will probably be a bit unfortunate for servers like Balmung that are the unofficial RP servers, where you're going to have a lot of people invading your home world that don't necessarily buy into the theme of your server. Maybe would have liked to see sort of an official adoption of an official acknowledgement of RP servers, or even an RP data center by Square Enix. I don't necessarily get into all that stuff myself, but I know that a lot of people have a lot of fun with it, and I think that this may be a bit of a negative for them. I do acknowledge that. But let's talk about sort of the big thing about what cross-world means. And the big concern was, what's going to happen to market boards? What does this mean? I think everyone went into it expecting, okay, you're going to be able to go and hang out in the other servers. You're not going to be able to use their market board. That's crazy. And, they started off in the live letter talking about how, all the things we expect. You're not going to be able to list that when you're on a different home, when you're on a different world, visiting a different world, you're not going to be able to list things on market boards. You're not going to be able to list things with your retainers. You're not going to be able to buy houses. I mean, all that stuff would just be crazy talk. And then they threw a wrench in all of it when they announced that you're going to be able to buy things off of market boards, though. And that was like big mind blown, because that changes a lot of stuff for the game's economy. And honestly, it probably changes it for the better. I think there are probably more pros to this than cons. And I say that looking through the lens of lesser populated servers. I do not say that looking through the lens of servers like Gilgamesh or Balmung or Leviathan or Excalibur, you know, the larger servers, because I think it's going to negatively affect those economies, but it's going to greatly bolster the economies of the lesser populated servers. Because if you're unaware of some of the situations in those less pop servers, the lower pop servers, the market boards are barren, and it makes it very difficult to actually exist in a market and have a foothold in a market. So while you won't be able to list things, you will be able to purchase things and then potentially relist them on your server. So it's gonna bolster them. And I use that word very specifically because it's either gonna bolster them in a very good way, or it's gonna bolster them in a very negative way. And which side you fall on just depends on what side of the market you're on. Are you somebody with a lot of money? Are you somebody with not a lot of money? And you know, depending on which person you are, it's either going to be a positive or negative experience for you. Yeah, but that was a big thing, big announcement. I don't think anybody was really expecting it. I think we were all expecting that it's just going to be a way you can visit friends. You're not going to be able to interact with that server's economy at all whatsoever. Yeah. Okay, we'll just see how it goes, right? I think that it's probably going to be a bit taxing for some of the people on the higher pop servers just thinking about it, but we'll see. I think that this is a good step going forward for the game, for the fact that a lot of these lower pop servers don't have as large of a community as the bigger pop servers. So, you know, things like hunts and maps and things are very hard to do on low pop servers. So you'll be able to at least be a part of those types of events by traveling to those higher pop worlds. So we'll you know, I think for them it'll be good, and the ramifications of everything else, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. The other big topic of the live letter is the one that I think has been the most controversial of all, and for very good reason. And I honestly thought about making today's episode entirely about this next topic. That's what I've been trying to move along and like get from point to point quickly, because this next topic I think is the biggest one, because this is the one that actually affects the end game the most. And what I'm specifically talking about is the announcement and confirmation that we are going to have not only server migration, but the introduction of new data centers. And this was met with some well-deserved negative reaction, I feel. And I'll get into why. So when they first started talking about this, they first actually hinted at this in the keynote. And at first glance, my initial reaction to this was, oh, this is actually a pretty good thing. Migrating servers is probably going to be very helpful, because what I initially anticipated that this was is I anticipated that this was going to be like only a server migration. So for example, imagine them just taking either Gilgamesh or Balmung, taking those really high pop servers and maybe moving one of them to Primal, and then moving two of the lower pop servers off of Primal onto Aether. And this would be a nice way for them to balance data center populations and maybe help out with some of the data center load on big patches and stuff. And I thought, oh, this is nothing but positives. You know, we're gonna have a bit of a fragmented, server relationship where some people are gonna have to, transfer servers that they maybe necessarily didn't want to keep relationships with statics and stuff. But upon further realization that what they're actually selling is not only server migration, but also server migration with the intention of doing so to create an additional data center, that was a big red flag, and deservedly so. The games, so their reasoning for doing this, let's talk about the reasoning first before we get into anything. The reasoning for doing this is they specifically highlight that there's a lot of new players coming to their game, and with the release of a new expansion, there's going to be even more new players coming into their game. So the game's population is going to go up, and they already have server load issues, and they are wanting to flex their wallet a little bit and get a third data center up and running for NA and a second data center up and running for the EU, and they want to sort of spread it out a bit. Now, while I do probably agree that what they're saying is accurate, I do believe that they probably are getting a large influx of new players. What's not happening is those new players are not necessarily the ones that are ever participating in endgame. And I don't think necessarily the largest player base of the game, the endgame is everything. But for many numbers of players, it is. And the endgame community right now is fairly small in this game. Compared to some other MMOs, the endgame community is fairly small. And that is very easily seen by, things like Party Finder and clear rates. And what's happening is, sure, the game's population as a whole may be rising, but the endgame population is not rising at a level that is consistent with that. So what's going to happen as a result is we're going to be spreading out this growing population, but also diminishing the endgame community groups that are already present, and we're going to be shrinking those by spreading them for NA. Instead of spreading them across 2 data centers, we're now spreading them across 3 data centers, and this is going to be, in my opinion, objectively a step backwards for the endgame community for the game. I'm not necessarily super gloom and doom about it, because I do know, I've been around this game long enough to where I know that new opportunities, new relationships will be born out of this. But I think it's almost undeniable that communities are going to take a hit, and they already have. We're already seeing it. Communities are going to take a hit, and the endgame population that you're able to coexist with is going to take a hit. And there's really no getting around that. I think for NA, we will survive. Obviously I'm an NA player. We will survive. There is a large enough player base participating in the endgame to where spreading us across 3 data centers as opposed to 2, we will survive and still be able to complete content and party finders. There will still be pugs available. There will still be people working together who don't necessarily work with a team from an FC or a team from a link shell static. I think NA will survive from this. Where a lot of players, myself included, are a bit concerned is what's going to happen in EU. We know that, apparently, based on their slides, we're going to see 2 entirely new servers added in the mix. That's just their justification for spreading it across 2 data centers. I don't buy this at all. I don't think that this is necessarily a good thing at all. I think that the endgame population for what was the previous iteration of the Chaos Data Center was, I don't actually play there, but from everyone I've spoken to, it was already at a state where it was barely kind of surviving. You're barely able to do the things that you want to do. If you spread that across 2 data centers, 1 data center is going to get completely screwed out of this. Completely screwed. You're going to have everyone transfer off of 1 data center onto the other if they want any hope at tackling endgame related content in a timely manner, and that's going to be the reality. One of these data centers is I'm going to make, this is my opinion right now. I'm going to state this as my opinion going forward. One of these data centers is going to be an endgame wasteland, an absolute endgame wasteland, and my obvious opinion is that it's going to be Light that is going to be that. Chaos obviously has some of the bigger name servers still represented on it. So I have big concerns about what they're going to be doing for Europe regarding this. I think with the NA side of things, Balmung is a large enough server to where Crystal can survive. PF will still be, it will still have endgame parties. You'll still be able to get things done via pugs. It probably won't be as easy as it is right now, currently on Aether, or Primal even. But I think it'll still be in a much better spot than some of one of the EU data centers will be. So I think this is a very unfortunate thing, and I did not think this was necessary. I really didn't. I'm going to be critical a bit right now. I've been very glass half full for a lot of what they talked about at FanFest, but I will be pretty critical about this data center announcement. I made my feelings known pretty early on that I questioned if FanFest was the appropriate place to announce this, and I got some feedback about that, and feedback that I think I've received well. I do kind of acknowledge at this point that had they not announced it at FanFest, the alternatives would have been much worse. This is something that they really need to get out in the open sooner rather than later. I actually even wonder if it might have been better if they announced this before FanFest. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if it would have maybe changed people's opinions toward attending FanFest, or if people would have brought a negative connotation to FanFest. But I think that it was a losing battle. They were fighting a losing battle no matter what they did, and I can't harp on them too much for announcing this at FanFest. I talked earlier about how, with a lot of their announcements, the crowd mics didn't really pick anything up on stream, so it sounded like you could hear a pin drop. But I was saying, that really wasn't the case. It was just poor crowd mics. I will say that with all this with all this data center discussion going on, you could hear a pin drop in the venue. I'm gonna be honest. This was one that was not received well, and rightly so. I feel like this is damaging. It's damaging specifically to endgame community. I acknowledge that this was probably the place and time for them to do it, but man, was it a hard pill to swallow. That said, thank the Lord that they did this before the Primalist concert, because the Primalist concert brightened everybody's mood who was admittedly down after the live loader discussion about the data center. I think that all the concerts that they did at FanFest were all like really great. Honestly, the highlights of the convention weekend. I'll be real. The Shadowbringers trailer was obviously hype, but we knew we were gonna get a good trailer. The concerts, I think, to me, are like the main event for attending the weekends at this point. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I've been to 2 FanFests now, and both times I think the concerts were the most enjoyable part of the weekend. If you haven't been to a FanFest yet, if you haven't watched one of these concerts on a very, very not illegal or not frowned upon video on YouTube, if you haven't checked those out in person or whatnot, definitely do. Come to 2020. Go to Paris, go to Tokyo, get out there and have fun with your Final Fantasy bros, your MMORPG nerds, and just have a good time with these concerts because they're really enjoyable. I think that the piano concert was very good this year. It was great last year too, but I thought it was very good this year. Yeah. So like I said, they wrapped up the FanFest convention with the Primalist concert, and it was definitely it's always a great decision to do so because if there's any like questions or concerns about any announcements over the weekend, it's very quickly forgotten by the attendees when you're rocking out with the Prime Wizard edition, and it was good stuff. They actually played Brute Justice this year. They didn't play it last year in last year's Vegas trip. There was a heavy crowd war for them to play Brute Justice. And they looked at the crowd and basically said, we're sorry, we actually don't know how to play that live. We can only play that in the studio. We didn't practice that all live. So they came prepared this year, knowing that people were very, very disgruntled that they couldn't play it live in 2016. So they made damn sure they could play it live in 2018. And it was a lot of fun. I think as far as like the actual FanFest convention goes, those were the big highlights. Talking about like just the weekend as a whole again. Yeah, they Lemon saying in chat that they heard us shouting about Brute Justice. He's talking about in 2016. We were literally just chanting in the crowd, Brute Justice, because we really wanted to play. I mean, I think that was like shortly after Creator, so Alexander was still super fresh, and Brute Justice A8 Savage has been like one of the most revered and enjoyed raid encounters that they've ever released. Definitely in like people's top 3, definitely on their Mount Rushmore for 14 encounters. And man, I was so bummed in 2016 when they couldn't play it, but I was super stoked in this last one when they could. The convention as a whole, if you look at it as a whole of all the announcements, I thought was great fun. I'll highlight once again. I watched through the Twitch broadcast of most of the panels and most of the event, partially because I was preparing for the show and I wanted to remember everything that I saw, but also just out of curiosity of how it was perceived over broadcast versus actually being there. It's a totally different experience being there. Like, you definitely got to get out there, experience it. I can't echo that enough times the show. Just a lot of fun. Definitely worth the $150 ticket that they bill you. And you get a lot for it. You get a great weekend out of it. Also, if they keep it in Vegas, you get a great Vegas weekend. There was a lot of fun stuff. Like I said, a lot of great dinner parties, dinner events. A lot of great Vegas shows. I know that a large group of our friends went to see the Cirque du Soleil Ka show. That was a lot of fun. I'd never seen that before. Things like the Blue Man Group. Just a lot of great Vegas entertainment going on the Strip. And then if you want to get away from the Strip because it's super pricey and impossible to find cheap food, head downtown Vegas. And that's where you can find all the cheap food and all the great food. Yeah, I think that going forward, what's on the agenda? What's on the agenda for us post FanFest? We have the Paris FanFest coming up next. That'll be the big event coming up next, where we're probably going to get what we can anticipate is going to happen is we had a teaser of a Gunblade based character in the Shadowbringers trailer. We already have very substantial rumors of a Gunblade based job. So because we have that teaser and the rumors of the job, we can expect that the Gunblade job is going to be announced in Paris. And we also are expecting this to be a 3-job expansion. So we can expect that in Tokyo we'll get information about the final job. And, I won't tease what everyone thinks that job is going to be. If you're listening to this and you just love being surprised all the time and excited, I won't say it. But it is already very well rumored what that job is going to be. I'm super stoked for it because I loved playing that job in Final Fantasy XI. So that's your one hint. It is a job that existed. And it's also a job that's existed in other Final Fantasies. Final Fantasy Tactics comes to mind. But there's a big rumor mill circulating around that, and one that I could totally see working. So I'm expecting Gunblade or Soldier, whatever they're going to call it, to be announced in Paris, and rumored 3rd job to be announced in Tokyo. Also expecting more information about Vieras to be announced in Paris, maybe even some rendered models. I think that'll be post 4.5, so we'll already have the Ivlis storyline completed at that point, so it won't be that far out of left field. And what we're going to have to see with these new jobs is we have rumors of what their roles are going to be already. How are those things going to shake up the job ecosystem right now? It's going to be very exciting to see what they do with the jobs. I think for some people are questioning like what kind of niche can these new jobs fill? Like the basic ones are already very filled. They're going to have to really think outside the box for these new ones. And I don't think necessarily they have to think too far outside the box, but I'm definitely looking forward to what they decide to do with it, and how they take these job identities and implement them in 14. And we saw what they did with the job identity of Blue Mage, and I think that for the most part, Blue Mage kept its identity. It's just channeled into an interesting path. But I digress. I think that as far as the FanFest event goes, that sort of culminates everything and wraps everything up that was of big importance for endgame related issues. So we'll probably be wrapping up today's show pretty shortly. Again, I want to thank everybody for hanging out and listening to me ramble for a little over an hour, and probably about an hour and 20 minutes here of just everything FanFest related. I had a lot of fun. It was a ton of fun to meet everybody again. If I met you at the event, if I didn't get to meet you at the event, please find me in 2020. I will damn sure be there. I wanted to spend specifics towards the end of the show, highlighting a lot of the people that came up to me at the event itself, asking about Crypt the Bootshine, and you guys are one of the reasons that I'm even here doing this episode today. I had taken a long hiatus from this, and this, like I said, this might be a bit of a shorter episode because we're just getting back into the swing of things. But this is a show that I took a long hiatus from because I sort of felt that I wasn't invested in the game as much as I would want to be able to produce content like I would want to. But with 5.0 coming up and my hype at an all-time high again, I definitely want to reinvest myself into putting out this content, and I was super grateful for all the people that came up in support of it over the weekend. So if you were one of those guys, total huge shout out to you. I couldn't thank you enough for supporting this nerd's dreams of just sitting here and talking about things that I'm passionate about for hours on end. Yeah, I think that about does it, guys. I'm going to start wrapping the show up now. We'll probably, for the purpose of the show, end it here and keep the stream rolling for a bit more while we do some Q&A. But for the purpose of YouTube and or the audio only version of this that I do plan to put out, that's going to do it for episode 4, season 2, episode 4 of Crypt the Bootshine. Like I said, there is going to be about 5 episodes planned in the immediate future. I will obviously make more than 5 episodes, but what I've found that works best for me is to take a block of ideas, do them in a bulk of shows, take a bit of a break after that bulk, come up with new ideas, and then maybe a month or a month and a half after that bulk, be back here with a set of new ideas for new shows. And that also I've found works very well for the way that they release content, because I try to keep things endgame related. If they're not releasing endgame content, oh, I'm having some drop frames. Anyway, so for the purpose of releasing the endgame content, or for purpose of releasing content related to endgame content that they're releasing, I felt that timeline works best. Yeah, I really appreciate that, and it looks like we're having some technical difficulties on the stream here, so I'm gonna wrap the show up and fix those things. But love you guys, thank you guys for joining me again, and look forward to the next episode, which is going to be light party content. And this is something that if you know me well, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that this is something I'm very passionate about, and something that I could speak for hours on end about. So I'm really looking forward to this episode. If you're somebody who plays other MMOs and has noted that in those games there's been more of a focus on the dungeon-based content, specifically thinking about World of Warcraft right now, the obvious one, this is definitely going to be a show that you'll want to come to and hang out for, because I think there's a lot of avenue for them to implement a better incentive to do these dungeons and do light party content in Final Fantasy XIV, and we're going to do a deep dive into that and some of the things that are really enjoyable about it. So please come hang out for that one. This episode, when I was planning this season of episodes, this is the one that jumped out to me. This is the one I'm super passionate about. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I've already got some big plans for that one. But I really appreciate it, guys. Get out of here. I don't want to see you anymore. I'm just kidding. In 2 weeks, we'll be back here at Fridays, 6 p.m. This is a new time slot compared to my old episodes. I used to do Thursdays. Now we're doing Fridays at 6 p.m. So in 2 weeks from now, we'll be doing that. And thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for hanging out. YouTube, goodbye. Audio, goodbye. I'll see you next time.